Welcome to Newscats. I'm your host, Ron DeParmesan. All right, folks, are the very foundations of democracy in Mexico about to be shaken up? Let's find out. A heated story is bubbling away from Mexico, where on September 4th, 2024, the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house of Congress, made a historic decision. They approved a contentious judicial reform bill that has set off a frenzy of protests across the nation. President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, often called AMLO, is pushing these changes aimed at boosting accountability by allowing elections for federal judges, including those in the Supreme Court. But hold on to your whiskers, because this bold move has ignited a fiery debate, with citizens taking to the streets and fighting for what they believe is right. Now, let me paint a picture here. This crucial vote did not take place in the usual halls of power. Instead, it was held in the Plaza de Armas gymnasium due to protests blocking access to the Legislative Palace. That's right. In a fascinating twist, lawmakers grappled with this issue for over 12 hours before they reached a vote. And the outcome? A tally of 359 members in favour compared to 135 against. This reform is proposed not only to elect judges, but also to reduce the Supreme Court's number of justices from 11 to 9. Critics have sounded the alarm, warning that this could unravel judicial independence and potentially threaten democracy's very backbone in Mexico. So what exactly drives this bill? President Lopez Obrador argues that the reform aims to make the judiciary more accountable and to tackle corruption. He boldly claims, "I believe this reform will make our judiciary more accountable and clean from corruption." His vision of a new Mexico hinges on giving local citizens more control over judicial appointments. However, many critics are raising big red flags and warning that opening elections for judges could create a hotbed for political interference in the judiciary, where judges might find themselves owing more to political parties than to the law. The protests have been massive, with over 50,000 judicial workers, students and civil society groups taking to the streets to voice their opposition. Even some Supreme Court justices have thrown their hats into the ring, joining the demonstrations. What do you think about these protests? Leave a comment on what a fair judicial system means to you. Now, as the dust settles, let's consider the immense stakes involved. International investors and officials are also concerned about the turbulence this reform could create. Both the United States and Canadian ambassadors have stepped in to voice their worries, labelling this shift in how judges are appointed as a significant threat to democracy in Mexico. These ambassadors assert that any erosion of judicial independence could not only harm Mexico's democracy, but also create instability within the rule of law. After all, nobody wants to see justice take a backseat to politics, right? The atmosphere crackles with tension as citizens demand their voices be heard, saying, "Hold on just a minute, we want a fair and independent judiciary." And frankly, can you blame them? So where does this tempestuous bill go from here? It now heads to the Senate, where the ruling Morena party holds a significant majority. Approval is looking likely, and let's keep an eye on how this unfolds. There's also the new president-elect Claudia Sheinbaum, who is set to take office on October 1st, 2024. She's thrown her support behind the proposed reform, and many players believe she will endorse it into law. If this does indeed take shape, we could see a monumental shift in the judicial landscape of Mexico. The implications are vast as we ponder what could really happen if judges are elected. Might we see them swayed by populism over law? This is a thought that advocates for democracy should consider deeply. With concerns lingering regarding organised crime and institutional corruption, the future is anything but predictable. So in closing, my dear listeners, we are witnessing a gripping situation in Mexico, a nation divided over a reform that could reshape its judicial framework entirely. Protests echo across the streets, voices rise demanding justice, and political manoeuvrings are unfolding in Congress. Whether the country ultimately embraces this reform or digs in its heels to resist remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, this story is far from over. Meow, keep your paws on the pulse and stay curious. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the latest news, make sure to like, comment and subscribe to stay updated. Until next time, keep your cat whiskers twitching and your minds open. We'll be back with more stories soon. I'm Ron DeParmesan, reporting for Newscats. Meow.